9 minutes. That's the figure I want you to hold in your head for the next 10-15 minutes or so, because it changes almost everything we've been told about exercise and longevity. 9 minutes of the right kind of movement spread throughout your day appears to reduce your risk of dying from any cause by about 40%, 40%. And the people in these studies weren't athletes. Most of them had never been to a gym before. As you know, I've worked in emergency medicine for 10 years, and the more I read into the research on things like exercise and longevity and diet, the more fascinated I become, and I want to share all of that with you. So if you're new to the channel, then hello, welcome. My name's Dr. Alex. My mission here really is to help you prevent the diseases that I see all the time in the A&E. And if you get something from this video today, if you find it useful, then the best thing that you can do to support what I'm doing here is click the like button and subscribe. Honestly, it really does make a massive, massive difference. Now, going back to the research. So the data that we now have completely dismantles this idea that you need a gym or even a structured workout to extract real longevity benefit from movement. And once you see this properly, once you reach the end of this video, the way that you structure your day might shift permanently. It's really, really powerful stuff. Now, let's start with this really big problem around how we actually define exercise. So for decades, the guidance has been built around blocks of time. So 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous activity, or 2 strength sessions a week. You know, all of these sort of ideas are tidy, they are measurable, but they are terrible at predicting whether real people actually do it. The compliance data is honestly pretty bleak stuff. Depending on which national survey you look at, between 60 and 80% of people fail to meet those targets, and a sizable chunk of those don't even come close, nowhere near. Now, part of this problem is obviously motivation, but a bigger part is actually architecture. Like, modern life isn't built around blocks of free time. It's built around fragments, like 10 minutes between meetings, or 3 minutes waiting for the kettle to boil, or 40 seconds on a flight of stairs. But what this recent research has done is take those fragments really seriously for the first time, and the results have surprised even the people running the studies. And all of this really is about something called VILPA, VILPA. Now, VILPA stands for Vigorous, Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity, VILPA. It sounds quite clinical, but the idea is really, really simple. These are basically just short, unstructured bursts of vigorous movement that happen inside your normal day, like sprinting across a road because the lights are about to change, or carrying your really heavy shopping bags up 2 flights of stairs without stopping, or chasing your toddler who's just discovered they can run, or walking up an escalator that's already moving. Each of these bursts typically lasts somewhere between 30 seconds and a couple of minutes. None of it counts as exercise in the cultural sense. Nobody's wearing leggings or running shoes or tracking it on Strava. And until recently, we had no real way of measuring it because self-reported questionnaires are notoriously unreliable. People either forget what they did or wildly exaggerate it. What changed things, though, was something called the wrist-worn accelerometer. When researchers from groups like the University of Sydney started analysing accelerometer data from the UK Biobank, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people tracked across years and years, they could finally see these micro bursts of movement that had been invisible to traditional epidemiology. And what they found was extraordinary. The headline sort of top finding in this study looked at adults who didn't exercise at all in the conventional sense, non-exercisers. And the dose response curve was steep at the bottom end, which is the most important part of this. Going from 0 to 1 minute of VILPA per day produced a significant benefit. Going from 1 to 3 minutes produced more. The curve then sort of flattened out after about 11 minutes, meaning the bulk of the benefit was achieved at very modest amounts of activity. And this is the opposite of how most people imagine exercise works. They picture a very slow, linear grind upwards, but in reality, you get most of the benefit in the first few minutes a day and then sort of diminishing returns after. So what this means really is that if you've never exercised in your life, the cheapest, fastest, most accessible health intervention available to you is probably already inside your normal routine. You just have to find it and then just turn up the intensity a bit. Now, before we move on to how to actually sort of engineer this into your day, there's something else that needs addressing that I've mentioned in a few other videos in the past, because it explains why VILPA works so well in the first place. So, sitting is its own pathology. It is not simply the absence of movement. The work from researchers like Mark Hamilton showed that prolonged sitting downregulates a very specific enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which is involved in clearing triglycerides from your bloodstream. Within around 90 minutes of continuous sitting, this enzyme's activity drops dramatically. Your glucose disposal worsens, your endothelial function deteriorates rapidly, your blood vessels actually become less responsive within hours of inactivity. And the disturbing finding from one meta-analysis, and I'll put a link in the description below, was that this damage occurs independently of whether you exercise. So what that means is that you can do an hour at the gym in the morning and then still sit for 10 hours afterwards, either in the car commuting to or back from work, or in the office, or just on your sofa after dinner. And the sitting causes measurable harm that the morning workout doesn't fully cancel out. Those two behaviours operate through partially separate biological pathways. And this is where VILPA stops being a curiosity and starts being a very serious intervention, because the bursts aren't just delivering cardiovascular training, they're also breaking up the sedentary periods that quietly do damage between your workouts. Now, another quite small but striking trial from the University of Houston showed that performing bodyweight squats every 45 minutes throughout a day produced better 24-hour glucose regulation than a single 30-minute walk. It's the same total amount of muscular work, roughly, but distributed differently with completely different metabolic consequences. So the signal from frequent muscle contractions appears to be more important than the total volume in some contexts. Now, there is a parallel conversation that needs to happen here, because all of this connects to the same underlying variable that almost no doctor measures in routine practice, and that is cardiorespiratory fitness, your VO2 max, the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can deliver and use per minute of exercise. Now, the data on cardiorespiratory fitness is some of the most consistent in the longevity literature. A landmark JAMA study from the Cleveland Clinic in 2018, looking at over 122,000 people who had undergone treadmill testing, found that low cardiorespiratory fitness was associated with a higher mortality risk than smoking, diabetes, and hypertension put together combined. That isn't similar to, we're talking higher than. The people in the lowest fitness category were about 5 times more likely to die during the study period than those in the elite fitness category. 5 times, not 50% more likely, but 5 times more likely. In clinical medicine, we treat blood pressure really aggressively. We treat smoking aggressively. We treat diabetes really aggressively. And yet we essentially ignore the variable that outpredicts all of them put together. Now, the good news is that you don't have to be an elite athlete to capture most of the benefit. You do not need to be doing Ironman triathlons in your spare time. As I said earlier, moving somebody from the bottom 20% of fitness up just one category, what the Cleveland Clinic data called below average, adds roughly 2 years of life expectancy. Climbing then to average adds close to 3 years of life expectancy, and then reaching the top end adds 5 or more years of life compared to staying at the bottom. And these gains appear achievable in most people at most ages with consistent training. The reason VILPA matters in this context is that short, intense bursts are remarkably effective at raising your VO2 max, with sort of thinking similarly to HIIT training, high intensity interval training. Now, there's a load of work from Norway that has shown that even brief intervals at high intensity stimulate the cardiac and mitochondrial adaptations that drive cardiorespiratory fitness upwards. You do not need necessarily to have a structured HIIT class. You just need repeated exposure to genuinely vigorous effort. So what that means really is that a sprint up the stairs at work 3 or 4 or 5 times a day ticks that physiological box. But the thing is, theory is one thing. The reason most people fail with this isn't ignorance, it is architecture. So let me give you a structure that seemed to have worked for almost every patient and viewer that I've described it to in the past. So the first principle is to find your natural anchors. These are events that already happen every day without you thinking about them, like boiling the kettle, or turning the coffee machine on, waiting for a coffee, waiting for the kids to put their shoes on, the walk from the car to the office. Each one of these is a potential opportunity to insert vigorous movement without rearranging your life, without adding time into your day. The second principle is intensity over duration. So a 2-minute walk doesn't really count for these sorts of purposes. What you're looking for is a level of effort where your breathing is much heavier and you couldn't really comfortably hold a long conversation, a bit like HIIT training. If you can sing, it's too easy. If you can barely speak, then that's about it. The third one is to distribute your bursts. So 3 sessions of 3 minutes spread across the day appears to deliver better metabolic outcomes than 9 minutes done all at once. Remember, your body responds to the signal of repeated demand more powerfully than a single longer effort. So the goal isn't to consolidate this. The whole point isn't to do this in the morning or at the end of the day. It is to scatter this. So a realistic day for some people might look like this. It could start with a brisk walk uphill to the train station that pushes you slightly out of breath. 2 minutes of stairs at lunch instead of the lift, but climbed at quite a fast pace. A short set of squats or a quick jog to the top floor before dinner. So I'm hoping that you realise none of this requires any equipment or a change of clothes or a gym membership. And cumulatively, it lands you in the mortality benefit range that the Sydney research identified, and again, research link below. And let me just add one more piece here, because VILPA on its own doesn't address everything, obviously. The mortality data is dominated by cardiovascular outcomes, and those respond beautifully to short bursts of cardiovascular effort. But the second pillar of longevity is muscle, and you can't build good amounts of muscle through exercise snacks alone. So the Copenhagen male study, which tracked thousands of men for over 30 years, showed that grip strength in midlife predicts both mortality and disability in older age more reliably than almost any clinical measure that we know of. And this comes back to sarcopenia, which we talk about quite often on this channel. Sarcopenia is age-related muscle loss, and it accelerates from around the age of 30 or 40 and becomes the dominant driver of frailty by your 70s, unless you do something to address it, which is resistance training. And the thing is, once you're frail, almost every other intervention becomes harder. You know, your medications work less well. You have recovery from illness, which is a lot slower. Falls become catastrophic. If you break your hip, then there's a good chance that you won't survive the next year. So while VILPA handles the cardiovascular and metabolic side really well, you still want some form of resistance work woven into the week. So this, again, doesn't have to be elaborate. It could just be 2 short sessions of 20 minutes each, focused on compound movements. And that could be squats or hip hinges or push-ups or deadlifts or pull-ups, anything really that requires a lot of straining of your muscles. And combined with the daily bursts of vigorous activity that we talked about, you've now covered the two largest modifiable predictors of how long and how well you will live. And if you add on cutting out ultra-processed foods on top of that, then you are absolutely winning. Now, the thing that I want you to walk away from this video with is this. Just remember that the version of exercise that we've been sold for decades, which is long and structured and very much time blocked and gym based, was always going to fail for the majority of people, for the average person watching this video right now, because it doesn't fit sort of how human lives actually run. The new data that we've talked about in this research tells us that we never needed this sort of exercise in the first place. Movement that is vigorous and frequent and distributed across the day delivers most of the mortality benefit that we associate with formal exercise. And it does so in a way that almost anybody can sustain, no matter how old you are or how heavy you are or how weak you are, whatever you think about yourself. You know, I'm pretty certain most people watching this could do something like this. The really saddest cases that I see in the A&E at work are, patients like the 70-year-old who lost their independence decades ago because they stopped moving in their 50s, or people with their first heart attack who spent 20 years sitting at a desk, taking a supplement thinking that they were protecting themselves, but eating poorly, not lifting weights, not exercising, barely doing anything. And the thing is, these outcomes are not inevitable. They are not just a normal part of getting older. They are, in most cases, as I always say, the cumulative downstream consequences of a generation that was told exercise had to be a special event rather than a feature of normal life. So just remember, if you're starting from scratch, you do not need to find an hour in your day. You need to find literally minutes, like 3 here and 2 there, and 90 seconds running up the stairs and 2 minutes doing 20 squats. That's it. And if you do that with genuine intent, those minutes appear to be among the most powerful medicines available to you. And unlike almost everything else I prescribe, they are free. They are side effect free, apart from a bit of really good muscle soreness the next day. And they are available the moment you finish watching this video. So turn your computer off or put your phone down, put your iPad down and do 20 squats now. And I promise you, you will feel better for doing it.